Good afternoon and welcome to the Falcon Oil and Gas Investor Q&A session. Throughout this recorded session, investors will be in listen-only mode. We have received a number of pre-submitted questions and these have been grouped. So if you could wait until these have been covered to submit your questions, that'd be great to avoid any duplication. The questions can be submitted via the Q&A tab situated in the right corner of your screen. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all the questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll, and we'll head into the Q&A session with the first question here, which reads as follows. There is a lot of information released by Tamboran and Falcon last week. Can you please talk us through the key highlights?
Yeah, thanks, Alessandro. Indeed, it's kind of funny because we sit around for month after month and there's kind of very little news, and then all of a sudden we get a gush of news like we did last week. So I guess there's like 6 key points I'd like to talk about. The first, obviously, is the good news that now the SS2H well has been opened up and put on production tests, and that's going to be for initial 30 days. So we look forward to updating the market in around about mid-June, and then we'll announce those flow rates. Really, I think the expectation on these flow rates will again, demonstrate the commercial potential of the Beetaloo. So that was the first bit of good news. The second bit of news is in relation to the first ever sale of acres in the Beetaloo, which was, to be honest, a surprise to us. We weren't aware of it. Delighted to see it because it involved a sale of 100,000 acres at $150 an acre. And why we consider this to be really good news for Falcon. When you look at our net 1 million acres at $150 an acre, that puts a minimum value on Falcon's acreage of $150 million US. So when you translate that down to our share price, 19 Canadian cent or 10 pence sterling, that's near a doubling of our current market value. And that's not yet been appreciated by the market, but nonetheless, that is really, really good news. The third item is in relation to the checkerboard. And, we flagged this previously. We knew it was coming. It's now announced. What this now does is it confirms that Tamboran and Daly Waters, they've agreed a split of the acres previously owned equally between them at 38.75%. Such that Tamboran will now own and operate 77.5% of 50% of the Beetaloo, and then Daly Waters will own and operate 77.5% of the other 50%. And this, as I said earlier, this puts Falcon in a really unique position because now we're the only company that will have an interest in all parts of the checkerboard. The fourth item of news, again relating to the checkerboard, is the fact that Beetaloo will now have a new and additional operator in Daly Waters. So again, more good news, another operator coming to the Beetaloo. And to be honest, Falcon, we're really looking forward to working with Daly Waters, and we've had an exceptionally good relationship with them for the last 2 or 3 years since they first entered into the Beetaloo. And then fifthly, not quite significant, is Tamboran has successfully raised an additional $55 million in the form of equity, and that's together with the $15 million they got from the sale of 100,000 acres. So that $70 million they've just raised last week means that our operating partner is now, fully funded to complete the next phase of the pilot drilling and then commence commercial production. And then lastly, and probably most significantly, I think, and again relating to the checkerboard, is that Tamboran has announced that their intent to farm out an area of about 406,000 acres in the Beetaloo. And why we think this is such a significant news item is because if they're successful in bringing in another player, maybe a major or a super major, maybe somebody who's going to be an operator, maybe somebody who's got LNG offtake in and around Australia, this will, no doubt put in another significant valuation marker on the Beetaloo, and more likely will also attract significant interest from other industry players and indeed equity players. So last week, as I said, we had a gush of great news, and I see some more questions which I'll talk to in terms of addressing some of these items of news I just spoken about.
Philip, you stated in the press release that the sale of the 100,000 US dollars acres by Tamboran to DWE puts a minimum value of 150 million US dollars on Falcon. Why do you think it should be more?
Yeah, again, it comes to the location of these acres. So if you looked at Tamboran's press release, about 21% of the acres that were acquired by Daly Waters, they're nowhere near the pilot. They're way up northeast part of our joint acreage, adjacent to a block called EP161, which is operated by Santos. Now, look, this could be really, really good acreage, but we today would place a lesser value on these acres simply because they're so far away from any development right now. The other thing is that the remaining 79% acquired by Daily Waters, it's located immediately north of the pilot area, but much of those acres actually is further north and even outside the core, deeper part of the basin, where no wells have been drilled to date. So when you look at those, where the acres are relative, if you're buying or selling acres in and around the pilot itself, we think that would attract a significantly higher value. But nonetheless, $150 an acre is a significant uplift in value from where we are today. So
Tamboran has engaged RBC to farm down the Phase 2 development area. How much of this area does Falcon own, and will Falcon be participating in Tamboran's farm down?
Yeah, look, as it applies to basically almost all of the Beetaloo acreage, other than a small area around the pilot, Falcons owns 22.5% of this area. When it comes to the question regarding participating in Tamboran's farm out, Daily Waters have tag-along rights, so they can participate in the farm down that Tamboran negotiates on the same terms as Tamboran. We don't have such rights. That's not to say Tamboran might not approach us and say, would we like to participate? But were we be invited to participate by Tamboran? It would really depend on what terms Tamboran had secured from the farminee and maybe who the farminee is. But remember, farm down will probably involve a carried work program to be either a number of development wells or a commitment to spend a certain amount of capex. But you've got to take into consideration, our optionality of going non-consent in any new area. So we could go non-consent, for example, in the first DSU, and therefore, rather than farming down 25 or 50% of our acres, we could just go non-consent in the first DSU of 6,400 acres. But any deal, when we look at it, we're not just going to be what's the best deal in terms of the dollars and how it translates in terms of preserving acres. We'd have to look at the whole thing of what makes best sense for the Beetaloo, the whole of the Beetaloo, what would make best sense for Falcon. And maybe if we were invited by Tamboran to participate in a farm down, it would make much better sense for us to do that, regardless of maybe giving up more acres than we might otherwise do by going down the route of non-consent in a DSU. But bottom line is, we've got plenty of options, and depending on an invite to participate, our options are even greater.
That's great. Thank you, Philip. Next question asks if you have any visibility as to when DW will commence drilling on their checkerboard acreage.
The simple answer to that is no. Can't really speak on behalf of Daily Waters. Yes, they're about to become an operator now that they own 50% of 77.5% of the Beetaloo. My guess is, they're unlikely to start drilling before the pilot program is completed. There's a lot of work to be done over the next 6 to 12 months, 18 months, drilling 3 wells, fracking 4 wells. And Daily Waters has, even though they're not operator of those, they've got serious financial commitments, given the fact that Falcon is at 0, Daily Waters and Tamboran are each at 50% of those. So I think, will they drill this year? Definitely not. Will they drill next year? Maybe, but a guessing person would say probably wait until the end of the pilot, and then they'd be working on building up an operating team and perhaps drilling in 2027. But that's, as I said, I can't speak on their behalf. That's just my guesstimate as when they will start drilling.
Totally understood. Moving to the next question. Are we actively promoting the potential to monetize a checkerboard area through a farm out?
No. And I've said this before in terms of we're not looking to farm down, a piece of our 22.5%. So we're not actively looking at it. Tamboran and Daily Waters, they've got operatorship in their respective checkerboard pieces. Plus, in most cases, they've got 77.5%. So these are, the two companies that are best positioned to, actively go out and promote a farm out. We, anywhere along the way, might be invited to participate in a farm out, but we're not going to actively look to farm out ourselves. However, what we do offer any farminee looking to come into the Beetaloo is, if you like, an insurance policy. That they could do something more strategic with Falcon, even, at the same time doing a farm in with the likes of Tamboran or Daily Waters. And what I mean by that is, let's say a major company farms into this phase 2 development area. They're not going to know for certain, is this a good area, a great area, an okay, an average area, even a bad area. So they might look to Falcon, given that we're the only company that's in every piece of the checkerboard. They might want to do something with Falcon that would give them exposure to 22.5% of the entire Beetaloo. So, like I said, we're not going to actively promote a farm out, but our unique position, being in every piece of the checkerboard, makes us a really attractive proposition for anyone looking to farm in however they want to do that.
Thank you, Philip. Another question here. Under the checkerboard agreement, does Falcon retain the ability to choose how much it wants to invest in any block?
Absolutely. So all our rights that we have on an existing JOA over the entire 4.6 million acres, they are completely preserved and protected and applied across all pieces of the checkerboard. So Falcon will continue to own a 22.5% working interest in every piece of the checkerboard, with currently just one exception, and that relates to the creation of a 20,000 acre DSU last year when we elected to reduce our interest in that DSU to 5%. So absolutely, all our rights, as I said, they're fully preserved and protected.
That's great. Can you explain how Empire's planned fracking of a 3 kilometre well might have a positive effect on the value of Falcon's acreage?
Tom, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, certainly. I'll take that one. The question's referring to an Empire well that was drilled, and they're getting ready to complete it. It's on their Carpentaria acreage, which is, pardon me, adjacent to our acreage, but pretty far to the east. It's in a shallower part of the basin, and it's likely to have a different pressure regime than where our current Shenandoah South project is. But all of Empire's Carpentaria wells have tested gas, so that's good news. It's really interesting to note that this is over 100 kilometers away from our Shenandoah South area, and that really demonstrates the size of this play. And while these flow rates may not be exactly comparable to the Shenandoah South area because of the lower or the shallower depths and lower pressures, that those depths and pressures translate into lower costs for drilling and completion for Empire, and that certainly could make that Carpentaria area commercially viable. And we wish Alex Underwood and his team much success over there at Carpentaria.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tom. Sticking to a similar theme, Tamboran's exploration and appraisal wells to date have been very expensive. What significant savings can we expect in the future?
Tom, again, you've had a lot of experience in starting in new fields and how you've seen costs starting very high, coming down. Maybe
every shale play in the U.S. that I've been exposed to has seen significant cost reductions and cycle times over time. And the Beetaloo will be no different. The one thing that impacted costs from the exploration and appraisal phase was just that the Beetaloo is just so remote, and that's had a significant impact on the costs. The JV was on a steep learning curve on the drilling and completion side, but those costs will come down just like they have in the U.S. Shale plays. There's lots of opportunities to cut costs. We've already seen that with the introduction of the H&P fit-for-purpose drilling rig, which cut the cycle time on the drilling side down significantly. But the other things that will impact the cost are if we can identify local sand for fracking, that will have a huge impact on every frack cost for future wells. And then just as activity ramps up and we get more service companies to locate into the basin, so there's more personnel, equipment, and tools at hand, that will have an impact on costs and cycle times.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tom. We have another question here. For the more technically interested shareholders, why was the SS4H well stimulation aborted? And what can be done so that it can resume as part of the stimulation of the new wells?
Yeah. Thanks for that question submitted earlier. When Tamboran the operator was completing our wells, the 2H sidetrack 1 and the 4H back in February. On the 4H, after having completed only a few frac stages, they noted or detected a pressure loss, and then went about the work of identifying a casing stress or stressing the connection of the 5.5-inch casing. And so the decision was made to stop the frac at that point in time and come up with a plan to repair the well. An attempt was made earlier this year to repair the well. It was unsuccessful. And Tamboran right now is has a plan, is working on a plan to get the 4H casing repaired and ready to frack when the 3 wells that they plan to drill in 2025 are ready to frack. So that may be at the end of 25 or sometime into 26. It's important to note that none of these wells will be selling gas, so there's no real urgency to get this well completed right now. You get economies of scale if they frack it with the other 3 wells that they intend to drill and complete, and gas won't be sold out here until mid 2026.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. Another question here: with Falcon's ability to partner with DWE and/or Tamboran and its new farm&E partner, might there be improved ways for Falcon to raise more money?
Yeah, look, at any activity like this will help anyone in their ability to raise money. You know, the implementation of the checkerboard, you know, gives us, as I said earlier, it's a unique position, being the only company in the Beetaloo with interest in all pieces. So that makes us very attractive. And anyone looking to invest will certainly look to Falcon, not just Tamboran and Daily Waters, as a vehicle, which, you know, as I said, creates this unique position. So yeah, anything at all that happens like this will help Falcon raise more money should we need to do in the future. So it's all pretty good news for Falcon.
That's great. We have another question here, kind of a broader question on the domestic gas market, and asks, what is the current domestic gas market like in Australia, and what positive impact will this have on Beetaloo gas?
Like it's been for the last few years, and I think for the foreseeable future, Australia gas market is very tight and getting tighter. And what that means is we're seeing today gas prices in Australia, domestic gas price in Australia, at like $12 Aussie dollars an MCF. So that translates back to about $8 US. When you compare that to US Henry Hub, which I think is around about $3.25, that's a massive 2.5 times increase. So yeah, so we've been talking about high gas prices in Australia for a few years, and I don't think there's any end to those high gas prices. So that'll have a huge positive impact on the Beetaloo going forward. It's one of the big attractions for the Beetaloo, not just the scale of it, but also because of the market you're going to play into.
And maybe just following on from that, what is LNG trading at in medium-term contracts in markets around Australia?
Yeah, so the LNG, the benchmark pricing for LNG in this part of the world is known as the JKM, the Japan Korean marker. That's currently, the last time I looked, I think it's like 18 Aussie dollars, or rather it's in US, so US dollar 12. So again, you know, massive pricing scenario to be playing into. So that $12 on the LNG, $8 domestic US, that makes, you know, the Beetaloo, it's achieving commerciality. The Beetaloo becomes an awful lot easier with those kind of gas prices.
That's great, thank you, Philip. Another question here: does the board of Falcon believe that gas is ubiquitous throughout the 4.6 million acres?
Yeah, I'll take that question. That belief is not unique to our board. Industry has drilled many wells across the last 15 years across a wide portion of this basin, and all the wells that have been drilled in the Valkyrie Shale have produced some gas, demonstrating that there's a working hydrocarbon system out here. So what remains to be determined is where the sweet spots, the core, the tier 1, whatever you want to call it, the most economically viable areas. This was common to all the U.S. shale plays. Again, there will be sweet spots identified. Doesn't mean that the tier 2 areas will be uneconomic, because as more infrastructure is built out, more rigs, more equipment come into the basin, more takeaway capacity, that could allow the tier 2 areas to become economically viable as well. And we know that Australia needs the gas. So it's the Beetaloo is going to be a critically important basin for Australia.
Understood, Tom. Thank you. Another question here: is Falcon still seeking a quote on one of the US markets and still considering a share consolidation? Maybe some color on that would be great.
Yeah, so we went out to our shareholders last October looking for consent to do the share consolidation. So our position with regard to the US quote and the share consolidation hasn't changed since then. These are matters that the board is continuing to progress and will do so over the coming months. I think the approval, I think, was the 30th of October. So we still have a number of months to complete that, should the board still consider it to be in the best interests of the company. The consent we got from shareholders is valid for 12 months. So if we complete it by the end of October, that's all fine. If it's a case that we decide to push it into the Q1 of 26 for whatever reason, we may have to go back to shareholders and just get that shareholder approval renewed. But the answer to the question is yes, absolutely. We're still considering both the consolidation and a US listing.
Thank you. And the final pre-submitted question we have here is, might one get a better idea of future acreage values from the proposed Tamboran farm down deal?
Definitely. I mean, the deal that was done last week, I think, is brilliant. As I said earlier, it's the first acre deal traded in the Beetaloo, and it put a pretty good price at $150 an acre. We're currently trading at about $75, $80 an acre. So that's a step up in value. In terms of $150 million is what would be the applied value to Falcon. In terms of a Tamboran farm down, this would most likely be in the form of a carried work program, not a direct sale of acres. So they're not directly comparable, but they're pretty comparable. I think one of the key important components of any farm down that won't just be the dollars. It'll be actually who it is. So if you bring in a major or a super major operating in and around Australian LNG, that's going to be a massive, massive boost for the Beetaloo. But putting numbers on it, the area that Tamboran are looking to farm down is 400,000 acres. Let's say they do a deal to bring in somebody for 50%, so farming down 200,000 acres. And let's say, and this is pure guesswork, that the farmee commits to a work program of $100 million US. Well, now all of a sudden you've increased the acres from $150 per acre to $500 per acre, and that changes the valuation of Falcon to $500 million overnight. So it's any deal that Tamboran does will definitely give us a much better idea on future acreage value, certainly. So it'll be fantastic news, again, whoever it is and whatever the metrics of that deal look like when it does get announced, if they are successful in doing one.
That's great, Philip. That does conclude the questions that we currently have. You have kind of covered a lot of ground there. We have also received some live questions. I don't know if you just want to have a scan through those. And if not, we'll go into some closing comments.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions here. Let me just flick through them here. So at a prior meeting, you said you plan to meet with US investment banks. Did that ever occur? Absolutely. Myself and Tom actually have met with a couple of banks, one in particular that is very interested in and very knowledgeable of Falcon and our partners, particularly Daly Waters. So yes, we have. Next question I see, have we a pressure from Tamboran to Falcon to sell his stake to Tamboran? No, there's no pressure from anyone to sell anything to anyone. So everyone has just his options. When is Falcon produce revenue instead of giving away more percentages of our rights? Well, we haven't given away much in the form of percentage of our rights. We've been at 22.5% for a number of years. That's, gosh, I think it's 2020 when we farmed down from 30% down to 22.5%. So we haven't gone any further than that, and we don't intend to. Giving up, in terms of a DSU, reducing our interest from 22.5% to 5% on 20,000 acres, that's such a negligible impact on overall rights. It's kind of the smart move to do. So no, we're not as I said, we're not looking to reduce our overall 22.5. We are, as I said in the initial Q&A, if there's an opportunity, an invitation to participate in a farm down of a single block like the one Tamboran, we'll certainly explore that. But we're not looking to overall farm down and be less than 22.5% ever. Let me just see. I'm just trying to get down here I think some of these questions I'm looking at have already been answered. Where do I see Falcon share price at year end? Who knows? Where are we now? May. There's going to be so much happening between now and year end. Flow rates, are not the be all and end all anymore, because yes, we're all looking forward to the flow rates next month. But a farm out is much more significant. I think when the market realizes the deal that Daly Waters did and acquired the acreage is 150 is far more significant. Tamboran about to launch a 3-well drilling program in July is significant. And then going into commercial production next year. So it's anyone's guess where the share price will be, but we now have a lot of forward momentum in the Beetaloo from many different angles, as I've just mentioned. So hopefully that will translate into a much better share price. The geopolitical and economic climate, tariffs, trade deals impacting Falcon's future opportunity as it pertains to China as a purchaser of Australian energy. Not really. We're looking at playing the Australian domestic market, as I said, at $8. Other players will come into the Beetaloo looking to supply into the kind of Japanese, Korean LNG market. So no, we're not going to be affected by the geopolitical and economic climate, for the tariffs and trade deals that are going on around the world. And I think that's all the questions, most of which I've already previously answered. So
That's great. Philip, Tom, I'd just like to thank you for answering the questions from investors. Of course, the company can review all the questions submitted today, and we will publish the responses on the Investor Meet Company platform as usual. But just before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to you both, Philip, could I just ask you for a few closing comments?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, I guess, but the key thing is we've got serious momentum now. There's going to be a number of major catalysts coming down the track between now and this time next year. Flow rates of Shenandoah, confirmation of the 3-well program at no cost to Falcon, by the way. Farm down process, which is formally launched by Tamboran. I think that could be the really exciting news. And we all look forward to a kind of a different Falcon by this time next year, but even by year end, and hopefully see that in the share price.
That's great, Philip. Tom, I'd just like to thank you once again for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close the session, as you now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback and all the management team can better understand your views and expectations. On behalf of the management team of Falcon Oil and Gas, we'd like to thank you for attending today's session, and good afternoon to you all.